A fighter pilot rolled his aircraft upside down during a dogfight and lived. Standard doctrine said this maneuver was suicide. Every training manual warned against it. Every instructor forbade it. But on the morning of January 15, 1944, over the skies of Brunswick, Germany, Captain Robert Harmon did it anyway. And when he completed that inverted barrel roll at 12,000 feet with a Focke-Wulf 190 on his tail, he discovered something that would change aerial combat for his entire squadron. 3 weeks later, his squadron of 23 P-47 Thunderbolts would face more than 50 German fighters in the worst odds any of them had ever seen. Standard tactics would have gotten half of them killed, but every pilot in that squadron had learned Harmon's forbidden maneuver. Every single one of them would make it home alive. But at 7:32 in the morning on January 15, 1944, nobody knew that yet. All they knew was that Captain Robert Harmon had just violated every rule in the book, and the German pilot chasing him had no idea what was about to happen. Captain Robert James Harmon was 26 years old, from Rapid City, South Dakota, where he had worked as a crop duster before the war. He had been flying P-47 Thunderbolts with the 352nd Fighter Group for 7 months, based out of Bodney Airfield in Norfolk, England. Harmon had flown 43 combat missions escorting B-17 bombers deep into German territory. He had 2 confirmed kills and 3 probables. Before the war, he had logged more than 800 hours flying beat-up biplanes over wheat fields, dusting crops for farmers who paid him in cash and hot meals. Harmon was tall, 6 feet 2 inches, with a lean frame that barely fit in the cramped cockpit of a Thunderbolt. He had dark hair that he kept cut short, regulation style, and gray eyes that seemed perpetually focused on something in the distance. His ground crew called him steady because he never got rattled, never raised his voice, never showed fear, even when returning from missions with bullet holes stitching his aircraft's wings. He was methodical in the air, careful. He thought 3 moves ahead, always calculating fuel, ammunition, distance to friendly territory. He had studied every after-action report from his squadron, memorized the mistakes that got pilots killed, analyzed the patterns in successful engagements. Harmon understood that survival in aerial combat was not about bravery or aggression. It was about geometry, energy management, and never making the same mistake twice. His squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel William Stanton, had recommended Harmon for promotion twice. Harmon declined both times. He wanted to keep flying, not push papers at group headquarters. He had joined the Army Air Forces in January 1942, completed flight training at Luke Field in Arizona, and shipped to England in June 1943. He had seen 16 pilots in his squadron get shot down. Some survived and became prisoners of war. Most did not survive at all. Harmon kept a small notebook in his flight jacket. In it, he recorded the names of every pilot killed from his squadron, the date they died, and what went wrong. 17 names so far. He reviewed that notebook before every mission. It reminded him that mistakes in the air were final. The problem was simple and deadly. German fighters were killing American pilots in turning engagements. The Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt Bf 109 were faster and more agile than the P-47 Thunderbolt at medium altitudes. When American fighters got drawn into turning dogfights between 8,000 and 15,000 feet, they died. The Thunderbolt was heavy, weighing 7 tons fully loaded. It could not turn with German fighters. Standard doctrine was clear. Maintain speed, use dive attacks, never get slow in a turning fight. But combat was not that simple. Bomber escort missions forced American fighters to stay with the bomber formations. They could not simply dive away and run for home when German fighters appeared. They had to engage. They had to turn. They had to fight at the enemy's preferred altitude and accept unfavorable odds. And when they did, they died at a rate that was mathematically unsustainable. Harmon had watched 17 pilots from his squadron die between June and December 1943. He knew all their names. He had flown wing for most of them at some point. The first was 2nd Lieutenant Thomas Breslin on June 23, 1943. Breslin was 22 years old, from Boston, Massachusetts. He had been in theater for 11 days. During a mission over Hamburg, Breslin got separated from his flight while engaging Bf-109s. He tried to turn with them. Witnesses saw his Thunderbolt snap into a spin at 9,000 feet. The aircraft never recovered. Breslin's body was never found. Captain David Chen died on July 9, 1943. Chen was 27, from Sacramento, California. He had flown 31 missions. Harmon had known Chen well. They played poker together in the officers' club. Chen was engaged to a nurse he had met in England. On a mission escorting bombers to Hanover, Chen's flight engaged a formation of FW-190s. Chen got slow in a turning fight. 2 German fighters converged on him. His Thunderbolt took cannon fire through the engine. Chen tried to bail out, but the canopy was jammed. Witnesses watched the aircraft go down, trailing smoke. There was no parachute. 1st Lieutenant Michael Romano died on July 18, 1943. Romano was 24, from Philadelphia. He had been a mechanic before the war, enlisted, then applied for flight training. He had flown 26 missions. During an engagement over Kiel, Romano's element got bounced by Bf-109s diving from above. Romano broke left, tried to reverse into the attack, but his Thunderbolt was too slow. A German fighter put a 3-second burst into Romano's aircraft. The Thunderbolt exploded in mid-air. Lieutenant James Kowalski died on August 2, 1943. Kowalski was 23, from Detroit. He had flown 19 missions. Harmon had flown wing for Kowalski twice. During a mission over Hamburg, Kowalski engaged a lone FW-190 and got drawn into a turning fight at 12,000 feet. The German pilot was better. Kowalski could not keep his nose on target. The German fighter reversed, got position, and shot Kowalski's Thunderbolt apart with cannon fire. Kowalski bailed out, but his parachute failed to open fully. He hit the ground at terminal velocity. By December 1943, the 352nd Fighter Group had lost 39 pilots. Most were shot down in turning engagements they could not win. The mathematics were brutal. American fighters had to escort bombers. German fighters would attack. Turning engagements were inevitable. And in those engagements, the heavier, less agile Thunderbolts were at a fatal disadvantage. The emotional cost was worse than the statistics. Harmon would see a pilot at breakfast, fly a mission with him, and watch him get shot down 3 hours later. Then Harmon would return to base, write the pilot's name in his notebook, and try to sleep knowing that tomorrow might be his turn. The worst part was the helplessness. Harmon followed doctrine perfectly. He maintained energy, used slashing attacks, never got slow. But doctrine assumed you could choose when to engage and when to run. Bomber escort did not allow that choice. You fought when and where the enemy appeared. And sometimes the enemy appeared with altitude advantage, speed advantage, and numerical superiority. On those days, doctrine meant nothing. Harmon had watched too many friends die following the rules. The rules were not working. Something had to change. The realization came on the night of January 14, 1944. Harmon was alone in his quarters, sitting on his bunk, reviewing his notebook by the light of a single lamp. Outside, a cold English rain hammered against the window. The room was small, barely large enough for 2 bunks, 2 lockers, and a desk. His roommate, Lieutenant Paul Morrison, was at the officers' club playing cards. Harmon had been thinking about the problem for months. The Thunderbolt could not turn with German fighters. Every manual said so. Every instructor repeated it. Every combat veteran confirmed it. The Thunderbolt's strength was speed and diving capability. Its weakness was sustained turning performance. But Harmon kept circling back to one observation from his own combat experience. When he fought German aircraft and maintained altitude while turning, he always lost the advantage. The enemy fighter could turn inside him, pull lead and shoot. But in the few instances when Harmon had rolled inverted at the top of a turn, he noticed something strange. His aircraft's nose dropped faster. The rate of direction change increased dramatically. Standard doctrine forbade inverted maneuvering during dogfights. The reasoning was sound. An inverted aircraft bleeds energy rapidly. You lose altitude, you become vulnerable. Every instinct and every hour of training taught pilots to stay upright, maintain positive G-loading, and never ever roll inverted in combat unless you were already diving away to escape. But Harmon could not stop thinking about those brief moments when he had been inverted. The Thunderbolt responded differently. The nose dropped faster. The aircraft changed direction more quickly than any normal turn could achieve. He pulled out a pencil and paper, started drawing diagrams. When a Thunderbolt turned normally, it maintained altitude by pulling back on the stick, creating positive G-force. The lift vector pointed upward, fighting gravity. The tighter the turn, the more lift required, which meant more drag, which meant more energy loss. A tight, sustained turn in a Thunderbolt was slow, draggy, and predictable. But what if you rolled inverted first? Harmon sketched it out. If you rolled inverted at the apex of a climbing turn, then pulled back on the stick, the lift vector would point downward. Gravity would assist instead of oppose. The aircraft would drop and turn simultaneously. The maneuver would be a barrel roll, but not a standard barrel roll. It would be an inverted pull-through, converting altitude into turning performance. The cost would be altitude. Maybe 1,500 feet of altitude loss, maybe 2,000. But the gain would be turning radius. A Thunderbolt doing an inverted barrel roll could potentially turn inside a Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitt that was executing a standard level turn. Harmon sat back. This could work. It violated every rule. Training manuals explicitly warned against inverted maneuvering in combat. The tactical bulletins from 8th Air Force Headquarters emphasized maintaining altitude and energy. Rolling inverted was considered a desperation move that got pilots killed. But Harmon had seen too many pilots die following the approved tactics. He had watched 17 friends get shot down, trying to turn with German fighters using standard methods. The approved way was not working. He looked at his diagrams again. The physics made sense. The Thunderbolt had enough power and structural strength to handle the maneuver. The risk was disorientation and losing too much altitude. But if executed correctly, at the right moment, it could turn the tables on an enemy fighter that expected a standard defensive turn. Harmon decided he would test it. Not in a training flight where instructors would shut him down immediately. In combat, where it mattered. Where the choice was between trying something new or dying the same way 17 other pilots had died. The next morning, January 15, 1944, the 352nd Fighter Group was tasked with escorting B-17 bombers to Brunswick, Germany. Harmon's flight of 4 Thunderbolts would fly top cover, maintaining altitude above the bomber stream to intercept any German fighters diving from above. The briefing was at 0500 hours. Weather forecast called for clear skies over Germany, unlimited visibility, light winds. Perfect conditions for German interceptors. Intelligence estimated they would face between 30 and 50 enemy fighters, primarily Bf-109s and FW-190s. The bomber stream would be vulnerable during the bomb run. Fighter escort would be critical. Harmon listened to the briefing, memorized the radio frequencies and emergency procedures, then walked to the flight line with his flight. The early morning air was cold, damp, smelling of engine exhaust and aviation fuel. The sun had not yet risen. Ground crews had already warmed up the engines. Harmon's Thunderbolt, tail number 42-318, sat waiting. He completed his pre-flight inspection by flashlight, checked the control surfaces, inspected the ammunition belts, verified the oxygen system worked. Everything was standard routine. But Harmon knew that in a few hours, he would attempt a maneuver that could either validate his theory or kill him. He climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, connected his oxygen mask and radio leads. The cockpit smelled like hydraulic fluid and old leather. The instrument panel glowed faintly in the pre-dawn darkness. Harmon started the engine. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial coughed, caught, then roared to life. 2,000 horsepower shaking the entire aircraft. Takeoff was at 0615. Harmon's flight formed up and climbed to 25,000 feet, then turned east toward Germany. The sun rose behind them, turning the clouds below into a golden ocean. Ahead, the sky was empty and blue. They crossed the enemy coast at 0745. The bomber stream stretched below them, more than 200 B-17s in combat box formations, their contrails streaming white across the sky. Harmon's flight flew 5,000 feet above the bombers, weaving back and forth, scanning the sky for enemy fighters. At 0812, the radio crackled. "Bandits! 12 o'clock high. Looks like 20 plus." Harmon looked up, saw them immediately. Black specks at 30,000 feet diving toward the bomber stream. Messerschmitts. At least 24 of them, coming down fast, building speed for slashing attacks through the bomber formations. Harmon's flight leader called the attack. "Blue flight, drop tanks, let's climb and engage." 4 Thunderbolts jettisoned their external fuel tanks and pulled up, engines straining, climbing to intercept the diving Germans. Harmon was flying number 3 position, on the left side of the formation. His altimeter showed 26,000 feet and climbing. Airspeed, 280 miles per hour. Oxygen flowing normally. Guns armed. The Messerschmitts came down through 30,000 feet. Harmon counted 26 of them. They were not going for his flight. They were targeting the bombers below. But Harmon's flight was climbing into their path. Within seconds, the Germans would have to decide: continue diving toward the bombers or turn to engage the American fighters climbing toward them. 3 of the Messerschmitts broke off and turned toward Harmon's flight. The others continued diving. At 0814, the engagement began. The first Messerschmitt opened fire at 800 yards, too far for accuracy. Tracer rounds arced past Harmon's right wing, bright yellow streaks against blue sky. Harmon's flight leader called for a defensive split, 2 aircraft breaking left, 2 breaking right. Harmon broke right, pulling hard, vision narrowing as G-forces crushed him into his seat. His wingman, Lieutenant Robert Kessler, stayed with him. The Messerschmitt followed, matching their turn, pulling lead for another firing pass. This was the moment Harmon had been waiting for. The Messerschmitt was in a standard pursuit curve, turning level, trying to cut inside Harmon's turn to bring guns to bear. Harmon was in a climbing right turn, bleeding speed, engine at full throttle. Standard doctrine said to roll out, dive away, use the Thunderbolt's superior dive speed to escape, but Harmon did not roll out. Instead, at the apex of his climbing turn, with his airspeed dropping through 220 miles per hour, Harmon rolled inverted. The horizon flipped upside down. The earth appeared above his canopy. The sky was below. For one disorienting second, every instinct screamed that he was about to die. Then Harmon pulled back on the stick. The Thunderbolt's nose dropped like a stone, but it did not fall straight down. It dropped while turning, carving a tight downward arc through space. Harmon kept the stick full back, holding 6 Gs inverted, feeling the blood drain from his brain toward his skull. His vision grayed at the edges. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 12,000 feet, 11,000, 10,000. Harmon rolled upright at 9,000 feet, completing the barrel roll, and found himself directly behind the Messerschmitt. The German pilot had expected Harmon to dive away or continue turning level. He had not expected an inverted barrel roll that reversed position completely. The Messerschmitt was now in front, filling Harmon's gun sight, less than 300 yards away. Harmon fired. 8 .50 caliber machine guns hammered. The Thunderbolt shook from recoil. Tracer rounds converged on the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Harmon saw strikes sparking along the enemy aircraft's wing route, saw pieces of metal tearing away. The Messerschmitt snap-rolled left, trailing smoke. Harmon followed. The German pilot tried to reverse, pulling hard, but Harmon stayed with him. Fired again. 3-second burst. The Messerschmitt's canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled inverted, entered a spin, disappeared into clouds below. Harmon's radio crackled. "Blue 3, good kill, break left. You got another one on your 6. Harmon broke left, rolled inverted again at the top of his turn, pulled through, completed another barrel roll, lost another 1,500 feet of altitude but came out behind the second Messerschmitt. Fired, hit the enemy aircraft's engine. Oil streamed from the cowling. The Messerschmitt dove away, smoking, heading for home. At 0822, 8 minutes after the engagement began, the German fighters broke off. The surviving Messerschmitts dove away east, back toward Germany. Harmon's flight regrouped. All 4 Thunderbolts were still flying. Harmon had expended 600 rounds of ammunition and burned through a third of his fuel. But his aircraft was undamaged. His flight leader's voice came over the radio. "Blue 3, what the hell was that maneuver?" Harmon keyed his microphone. "Something I've been working on." "Well, it worked. That was the fastest position reversal I've ever seen." Harmon checked his instruments. Altitude 8,000 feet. Fuel sufficient to return to base. Engine temperatures normal. He had lost 3,000 feet of altitude during the 2 barrel rolls, but he had gained something more valuable, proof that the maneuver worked. The flight returned to Bodny at 0941. Harmon landed, taxied to his hardstand, shut down the engine. When he climbed out of the cockpit, his crew chief was waiting. "Good mission, Captain." "Very good. I counted empty casings. You got somebody." "2 probables." The crew chief grinned. "Outstanding." Harmon walked to the debriefing room. His hands were still shaking from adrenaline. He had violated every rule in the tactical manual, and it had worked perfectly. The inverted barrel roll had reversed his position from defensive to offensive in less than 10 seconds. The German pilots had not expected it. They had no counter for it. When Harmon rolled inverted and pulled through, he had turned inside their standard maneuvers, gained position, and shot them down. But Harmon also understood the risks. He had lost 3,000 feet of altitude. If the engagement had occurred at lower altitude, below 10,000 feet, he would have hit the ground. The maneuver required altitude to work safely. It also required precise timing. Roll too early, and you waste energy. Roll too late, and the enemy shoots you before you complete the turn. During the debriefing, the intelligence officer asked Harmon to describe his tactics. Harmon explained the inverted barrel roll in detail. The intelligence officer looked skeptical. "That's not in any of our tactical bulletins, Captain." "I know." "Did you learn this somewhere?" "No, I figured it out myself." The intelligence officer made notes. "I'll have to report this to group headquarters. They might want to talk to you." Harmon shrugged. "Tell them it works." 2 days later, Harmon was called to a meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Stanton, the squadron commander. Harmon expected to be reprimanded for violating doctrine. Instead, Stanton asked him to demonstrate the maneuver. "8th Air Force sent down a query about your combat report," Stanton said. "They want to know if this barrel roll maneuver is reproducible or if it was a one-time thing." "It's reproducible, sir. I can teach it to anyone." "Then teach me." That afternoon, Harmon and Stanton flew a 2-ship training mission over the English countryside. Harmon demonstrated the inverted barrel roll 3 times. Each time, he rolled inverted at the apex of a climbing turn, pulled through, and came out 1,500 feet lower with complete position reversal. Stanton attempted the maneuver himself, failed the first time, rolled out too early, succeeded the second time. After they landed, Stanton was sold. "That's the fastest defensive turn I've ever seen," Stanton said. "If we can teach this to the entire squadron, it changes everything. German fighters will not know how to counter it." "There are risks," Harmon said. "You need altitude. Below 10,000 feet, it's dangerous, and you have to commit fully. If you hesitate halfway through, you lose energy and become a sitting target." "Understood. Can you train the squadron? Yes, sir. Over the next 2 weeks, Harmon trained every pilot in the 352nd Fighter Group. He taught them the mechanics of the maneuver, when to roll, how much back pressure on the stick, how to manage the G-forces, how to roll upright at the right moment. He emphasized the importance of altitude awareness. Never attempt the maneuver below 10,000 feet. Always check your 6 before starting. Always commit fully once you begin. Some pilots struggled initially. The disorientation of rolling inverted during combat was intense, but Harmon drilled them repeatedly until the maneuver became instinctive. By early February 1944, every pilot in the squadron could execute the inverted barrel roll successfully. On February 6, 1944, the squadron got its first opportunity to use the new tactic in a large-scale engagement. The mission was escort for bombers attacking aircraft factories near Leipzig. Intelligence predicted heavy German fighter opposition. More than 50 enemy fighters were expected. The squadron took off at 0700. 23 Thunderbolts, every pilot trained in Harmon's maneuver. They rendezvoused with the bomber stream over the North Sea and escorted them into German airspace. At 0918, the German fighters appeared, 54 of them, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, diving from altitude, attacking the bomber formation from multiple directions simultaneously. It was the largest number of enemy fighters the squadron had encountered. Harmon's squadron commander split the unit into 3 flights and positioned them to intercept different groups of attackers. Harmon led one flight of 8 aircraft against a formation of 18 Messerschmitts attacking from the north. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. German pilots dove through the bomber formations, made firing passes, then climbed to reset for another attack. Standard tactics. But when American fighters engaged them, the Germans found something unexpected. Every time a Messerschmitt got on the tail of a Thunderbolt and prepared to fire, the American aircraft rolled inverted and pulled through in a tight barrel roll. The maneuver was so fast that German pilots could not follow. Their targets disappeared from gun sights, reversed position, and came out shooting. Harmon personally shot down 2 Messerschmitts using the maneuver. His wingman got 1 confirmed kill. Across the entire engagement, the squadron claimed 12 enemy fighters destroyed and 7 probables, with no American losses. 0 American losses. 23 Thunderbolts went into combat against 54 German fighters. All 23 came home. After the mission, during the debriefing, the squadron intelligence officer looked stunned. "Gentlemen, I have been doing these debriefings for 18 months. I have never, ever seen a mission where we engaged superior numbers and did not lose a single aircraft. This is unprecedented." Stanton stood up. "Credit goes to Captain Harmon. His maneuver saved lives today. German pilots had no answer for it." Word spread quickly through 8th Air Force. Other squadrons requested training. Harmon spent the next month traveling between fighter bases, teaching the inverted barrel roll to pilots from different groups. By March 1944, hundreds of Thunderbolt pilots had learned the maneuver. The impact on combat effectiveness was measurable. Fighter groups using Harmon's tactic reported significantly lower loss rates during engagements with German fighters. The maneuver did not guarantee survival, but it gave American pilots a defensive option that worked against more agile enemy aircraft. 8th Air Force eventually published a tactical bulletin describing the maneuver, though they did not call it the Harmon roll. The official name was Inverted Defensive Turn, but pilots who learned it from Harmon called it something else. They called it the suicide roll, because on paper it looked suicidal. In practice, it saved lives. Captain Robert Harmon completed 78 combat missions before the war ended. He shot down 6 enemy aircraft, all confirmed. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions on February 6, 1944, when his squadron engaged 54 German fighters and all 23 American aircraft returned safely. After the war, Harmon returned to South Dakota. He never flew crop dusters again. Instead, He opened a small airfield and taught civilian pilots basic flying skills. He rarely talked about the war. Most of his students never knew he had flown combat missions or developed a maneuver that changed aerial tactics. In 1987, a military historian researching P-47 tactics during World War II discovered references to the Harmon role in squadron records from the 352nd Fighter Group. The historian contacted Harmon, who was then 69 years old, living quietly in Rapid City. Harmon agreed to an interview. During that interview, Harmon explained the physics of the inverted barrel roll, why standard doctrine prohibited it, and why he decided to try it anyway. He talked about watching 17 friends die following approved tactics. He described the moment in combat when he first rolled inverted and felt the aircraft respond differently. He explained how the maneuver spread through 8th Air Force and how many lives it potentially saved. The historian asked if Harmon felt proud of his contribution. Harmon thought for a moment. Then he said, "I feel grateful I figured it out before more pilots died." The historian's research was never published in a major journal. A small article appeared in a military aviation magazine in 1989, describing the tactical innovation. A few veterans who had flown Thunderbolts read it and remembered. Most people never heard about it. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47 Thunderbolt sits on display. The placard describes the aircraft's specifications, combat record, and role in achieving air superiority over Germany. It mentions that Thunderbolt pilots developed innovative tactics to counter more agile German fighters. It does not mention Robert Harmon. It does not mention the inverted barrel roll. It does not mention that 23 American pilots survived an engagement with 54 German fighters because one captain from South Dakota figured out that breaking the rules could save lives. Robert Harmon died in 2003 at the age of 85. His obituary in the Rapid City Journal mentioned he was a World War II veteran and owned a local airfield. It did not mention the suicide roll. It did not mention the lives saved. That is how wars are often won. Not by famous generals or celebrated tactics or innovations that get written into official histories, but by ordinary people making desperate calculations under impossible pressure. By pilots who watch too many friends die and decide to try something different. By men who roll inverted at 12,000 feet when every rule says not to, and discover that sometimes the suicidal option is the only one that works. The suicide roll was not elegant. It was not graceful. It violated every principle of energy management that instructors taught. But it gave American pilots fighting heavier, less agile aircraft a way to reverse position against superior enemy fighters. And in the brutal mathematics of aerial combat, that single advantage meant the difference between coming home alive or becoming another name in someone else's notebook. Harmon kept his notebook until he died. 17 names written in careful handwriting. Pilots he could not save. But after February 6, 1944, he stopped adding names. 23 pilots went into combat that day against impossible odds. 23 came home, and none of them would ever forget the maneuver that saved them. Sometimes the most important innovations do not come from test pilots or engineers or tactical analysts. They come from exhausted captains sitting alone at night, reviewing a notebook full of dead friends' names, and deciding that there has to be a better way. From men who understand that survival is not about following rules perfectly. It is about recognizing when the rules will get you killed and having the courage to try something different. That is what Robert Harmon understood. And that is what saved 23 lives over Leipzig on a cold February morning in 1944.